and I've started our recording. So I would like to welcome all of you this evening to the Stockbridge Library, Museum and Archives Narrative Medicine series. We're delighted to have with us this evening poets Abigail Wender and Owen Lewis. And Dr. Lewis was the seed for the idea for this program and his work with narrative medicine, which I think he will share with us a little bit about before our reading this evening. And just a quick introduction to our poets tonight. Abigail Wender is the author of Reliquary, which is a collection of poems that take us through her journey of loss and grappling with some difficult issues of our day. And Owen Lewis is the author of Field Light. And he has two chapbooks, Best Man, and he has won several awards. His poems have appeared in many publications, and he is also a professor of psychiatry at Columbia University, and he teaches narrative medicine in the Department of Medical Humanities and Ethics. So we have two Berkshire poets joining us from New York City this evening. And I am very grateful to both of you and happy to welcome you. And I will, without further ado, turn the program over to the two of you.
Thank you so much, Wendy.
Thank you.
Just a brief word, and then Abby and I will begin discussing the topic. The whole idea of narrative medicine has a very important use in training medical students and doctors and working with staff. But there's an awful lot that we can learn through the writings about healing and illness that doesn't really come up in the textbooks. And so this series is devoted to 6 entities, shall we say, with collections of poems that are focused on that area. Last week we had Kate Daniels, who was talking about addiction and recovery, and in a painful but hopeful way. And Abby and I shared the unfortunate experience of losing brothers to an addiction, and we've each written about that. Abby's book, if you could see this, Reliquary, has just come out from 4-Way Books, and I'll be reading from, it's a little hard to see this, Best Man, which is now out a number of years. And yeah, so Abby and I are going to talk a little bit about kind of what's behind these collections, and then you'll hear us read, and then there'll be time for some questions and answers. So Abby, do you want to say anything to begin?
Well, thank you both for having me. Thank you for asking me, Owen, first of all. I guess it's really, it's been interesting to think about your book and my book next to each other, like that, because they are about a very similar experience. Our experiences overlap in many ways, and yet our process of dealing with it and writing about it is so very, very different. And that is perhaps a really interesting thing about writing or about human beings and how we deal with our different experiences. There is just not a single rote way of writing a poem, but also of dealing with certain kinds of experience. So that's been interesting to think about for me. Um, uh, when we Owen and I exchanged, some thoughts, and one of the things that came up for both of us was the way in which, for both of us, the cemetery comes up again and again. Flowers, I think you mentioned, Owen. And for Owen, I was interested in his use of letters. For instance, the book, the chapbook, is a set of epistolary poems. So I don't know. I think there's a lot to talk about.
You know,
Um,
one thing I thought that we might orient our readers to where and when the writing of this is happening in relation to the loss of the brother.
hmm,
And I think that that sort of sets up some of the differences. My brother was 23 when he died, and I really couldn't get near this for a good 25 plus years. I would try to write about it. And I think in many ways, as you'll hear, there was so much of that that I just couldn't deal with. So I didn't. I just kind of put it out of my mind. And in lots of ways, what we know from the Greeks on, that when you don't properly mourn an individual, they haunt you in certain ways. So this book opened up for me 25 plus years after the death of my brother.
hmm.
And there is going back, there is looking at things along the way, but all from the point of view of reconciling in whatever way that's possible. And your book, Abby?
Well, my book, I would say the poems in this book have been written for, I think, 25 years. So I would say that's not what's in here, but this subject obsessed me basically for many, many, many years. Both my brother's addiction, he became addicted. I became aware of his using heroin when he was in his early 20s. And first I was very obsessed with trying to help him. And then as life went on, he was arrested. He was put in jail for many years. I was very saddened, and I wrote about it for many, many years. And this book really is a culmination of many different ways of looking at that material. So it's not, I think a lot of my writing life, I have thought about this and worked on this material, and pushed it away, but then went back to it. So I think this book is a book that closes that chapter for me in some way. I'm very happy to have it be sort of a finished thing, but it's really about in some ways becoming a person, growing up with these issues and trying to come to terms with them as you grow up, as you become an adult and do all the different things that you take on throughout your adult life. So there are other poems in this book as well, but they are quite touched by the grief and some dynamics that come out of that experience.
You know what's interesting? I think both books end in a kind of closure,
Mhm.
but mine sort of burst forth when I found the key to opening it, or should I say, it found me. The sequence was written in a matter of 3 or 4 months,
Mhm.
um, and so living with or denying and then living with, or living with what's denied are two very different entries into the same material. Another commonality that I want to say, and I think this is important, although my brother was not imprisoned for long periods of time, he was in prison, and I will be reading a poem about a visit to jail with him, and I think that probably for both of us figures importantly in the writing of this of our books.
I think the issue of jail and incarceration is a big issue for people, for anyone, whatever class or caste or whatever their background, because there's a tremendous amount of shame around it. And I think that is difficult to write about and difficult to come to terms with. My brother was in jail for selling heroin, so he was trying to bring it into the country, and I think, and it certainly wasn't the first time he was in jail, but that was the time that he went to jail for 4.5 years or 5 years. And I think that experience for me was one in which I learned something about our country and how we deal with people. And I think it was a profound experience for me. Yeah. And the hardship, what we do to people who we want to put away.
Mm-hmm.
It was, yeah. So.
Wendy, did you want to ask a question of either of us before we begin to read?
I think I'm anxious to hear you both read your work and kind of immerse us all in both your experience and your expression of your experience. So that was the long way to say, I don't have any questions quite yet, and I'm looking forward to your reading.
Great. So shall we read, Abby? Maybe, would you like to go first?
I'm happy to, or whatever you want, Owen. I was going to say before I read that I'm going to read a sequence that I usually don't read the whole sequence, because as I was reading it to prepare, I realized, well, this is a little grueling, and I think that this is a very obsessive book, and the sequence was written, as your work was, Owen, in a very hot moment. And in fact, the book was called Auguries at one point, one of its first iterations.
Mm-hmm.
Because this book went through a lot of different, types of, it was a different type of book at different times. But I thought I would start with a poem that I wrote in answer to a question, which was, why are you writing about your brother? He sounds like a pain in the ass. So I wrote this poem. And of course, for me, because I'm the kind of writer who writes a little and then adds to it and then takes it away and then adds to it. And it took me a very long time to get to the end of this poem. But I'll start with that, and then I'll read the sequence, which will include a number of the of poems about prison and visiting my brother in prison and the experience of having someone in prison. So this is called Brother. And maybe I should say this also, that this book, although I didn't quite see it when it first came together, it's really bookended by my brother's death and my mother's death. And they're connected throughout the whole book. So, Brother. Because he can't tell his own story May he never sleep another night in jail. May he never shiver heroin sweat, flea bitten, rib broken. Because he forgot that we'd walked with our dog, may he never forget the blue spotted salamanders we found in muddy banks, or how we swung by the rope into those rough waves. May he sing all night, dream of a sunflower woman. And let me forgive him, brother and consolation, though he dealt me a bad hand and the price rose. Let me not forget him, brother and sorrow. Return from prison those 5 years, engulfing him like a rubber suit, his tearless eyes pondering me, my every fortune. Flowers. Once they arrived without a card. The man I rented a room from took them, hoping they were his. I knew they were for me. It was wintry gray, and I needed the red and blue anemones. Those years, irony meant nothing to me. I traveled from one country to another, searching for a pear tree, supported by ladders. And this is a sequence I was talking about. Auguries. Oh, my brother, no more your orphan mouth. Why can't I kneel and pray? I let myself out the window, take the fire escape. The days pant, the days hang. He vanishes like water through my fingers. But he wasn't made of light or water, though he seemed lucent, tender after the evening bath, the child who wrapped a towel turban style on his head, joked, I'm delightful to be with. He was right about the war, and I was a pedantic twerp. He ate mayonnaise sandwiches, played trumpet, then flute, disappeared into the dog's luxuriant fur, whip and speed of ocean surf, devoured our mother's ice cream wafer cake, licking the whisk she'd hand him. The poet Horace told his friend not to weep. It's all superfluous. I won't be there. This is a reliquary to hold my brother's gifts, his sad kindness. What to say to those who remember him? I wait to hear him praised. What led him to that outermost gate? Our absent father, our violent elder brother. One blames the mother, at least that's what ours thought. Don't wear that. No one will ever love you. You look like trash. Mother, who brought the grown child home, stayed awake with him, strung out, shallow-breathed, who stored his methadone on her refrigerator shelf. Our elder brother weeps, back shaking. He looks like a crow hiking his shoulders raised for flight, his hair dyed blue-black. She looks out the window hung with sky. Tears mark her brown suede jacket, slide from the creased face and wide mouth, from her neck to her hands, from her dove-like body, her dark head, fine hair, the sharp smell of her as she bends over me, my hand patting her back. She stares at a point beyond this, twists papers my father demands she sign, and gives in, forsakes her older boys. They will live with their father. At a flash in the sky, she beckons her sons back into the room, as if they might come like music through a window. I find a cache of love letters, airmail paper, still crisp. I found a home for us, sunny and cheap, he wrote. On what occasions does my mother reread these letters? Each time they go to court? Kitten, I'm confident you're not pregnant. Each time my two older brothers run away, steal, deal drugs, are sent to rehab, psych ward, prison, I've bought a navy pinstripe suit for the wedding. Below my father's signature, she appended with age-old scorn, had a wife, he couldn't keep her. The house is divided. Descended from gray wolves, our affectionate dog barks, guards the domus. Wide-mouthed mother packs the linen drapes, takes my younger brother and me. Far-sighted father takes the ivory chest and older boys. The dog of the era is left behind to shepherd, dig the rat hole by the brook, to pace, retreat, and wail. Dying, my mother asks, what madness was I thinking? To forget that dog. You won't want it when you have it, she says. The light bulb gives no heat. The lukewarm batter never sets. Nothing bakes in the toy oven. She knows the folly of desire. I am too old for make-believe, but she buys it because I've lost father, brothers, house, and dog. Driving half-lit, snowy streets, the cabbie says, keep fingers off glass. From the rearview mirror swing bronzed baby shoes. Whose are those? Who are we? Shuttled from home to home, knapsacks rattling on the seat. Two mice in a tin. My baby brother's fingers leap on glass. Ghosts jump from the past. This poem is called Via Negativa. I've lost track of time, but I think I'm okay. This time I won't think the sky is falling while riding the bus to Rikers Island. In the prison waiting room, no guard will touch my shoulder, say, why so scared? This time I won't be afraid, won't flinch, won't shudder. Cameras won't seek us, clicking from every corner. And he won't ask if I have it, and I won't have it. Pressed into my sneaker, dope, like me, closed in a yellow balloon. Reading Basho, what I call his drinking songs. Cocaine vial catches my eye. A voice calls, crystal vein. Makes you feel like a god and alive. You can't be both. Sing Sing. She wants me to, why? She wants me to stay overnight in a prison trailer. The three of us, mother, son, daughter. They let you do that, the family together. I refuse. We stand in the visitor's line, our two brown bags filled with fruit, salami, cartons of cigarettes. Snow drifts into our shoes. Prison construction exceeds all other industry. One of the years he's inside is declared New York State's Year of the Prison. Sister. He's one more man lit with prison fluorescence. The day he's released, he welcomes me. What took you so long? Tears in my mouth, feckless, I think. Dressed in street clothes, he looks well enough. My arm around him, the prodigal. I bring him to our father's house. Oh, I'm not so different from the bitter sibling. Boy, he played with fire, lit matches by the dozens, hid the tinder beneath his bed. 3 years older than I, he took my hand at the crossroad, stood between me and our elder brother, sounded words I couldn't read, and buried himself in sand for me to trip over. Hiking, I tried to understand why countless unnamed pollutants poison our air, how millions of dollars were spent marketing opiates. Get in the swing with OxyContin. The mountain path ends in rock. Hiking, I break my walking stick. It's replaceable. There's a silence that's like unspoken complaints, two minds not making amends. At the meadow's edge, a scarlet tanager alights on a white pine. Are there words for us, America, high on an uppermost branch? Just two more short little brother poems. This is towards the end of the book. It's called Brother Again. I knew the time was coming when he'd be free, one of the many rising over the tree line, over yards, waving down at Mrs. McCarthy, the crossing guard below, halting cars on Old Army Road and gliding in the soundlessness above street and traffic, steering towards his castle, even now. Mother, I feel her bubble up from sidewalk pavement. She who causes tremors, causes unfolding. Forsythia, black hellebore, rude crocus, then a breeze flits, a daub, a caress, a wink. So, thank you.
Abby, thank you. Beautiful work.
Thank you, Owen.
I don't know how you find it. I love reading from this book, but it's also sometimes hard to be back in the space that that these poems came from. Okay, I'll begin with the opening of the book. It's called So. So, I am still mad at you. Every week, another call from a pharmacy, a burnt out Bronx neighborhood or Brooklyn. Percocet, Dexedrine, shopping lists, benzos. That last visit you took my prescription pad, sold it. I refused your calls. From Florida, from the ICU. Frantic, your girlfriend overdosed. Our grandmother told me you were okay. She had cooked you a pair of fried eggs. I've never known how to think about your end. So often, I just don't. And we talked about flowers a little bit. As you'll see, we've just sort of finished with the snowdrops. And as you'll hear in this, my mother always said those were my brother's flowers because they came up around his birthday. And this is called Thaw. I hate March. White flowers pushing the edges. Mother traipsing us around the yard to see those little blooms, birthday presents, yours, she called them. She's gone too, and who's to celebrate the scatter of white snowdrops? They shame me, their strength, each lifting a plaque of ice. The snow lies, a smoothing of contours across the yard, now a jagged branch, an elbow sticking through, a poke in the side, it prods what lurks, what hides within any person's body, as if from the start that body's death note were already written. Mother's cancer, father's failing lungs. So it's March 12th at 7:32 p.m. Doesn't matter the year, the decade. Again, the scatter of white pills across your bed. And the third, called En Route, Beth Israel's Cemetery. It doesn't seem to matter, visiting or not. Who the hell's here? So many people left pebbles near to say hello. Not one for you. Who's watching a town of relatives on Ridgedale Avenue, Cedar Knolls? Not my Xanadu. En route to an aunt who remembers and friends who don't, can't look at your name staring, the headline always blaring, found after 3 days. Bel Air Motel, Miami, 100-degree nights, the air a fever, coma oozing from your eyes, no diploma needed to read this dark, your face running off your cheeks in rivulets. Back home, the northern earth took hold, hardened eyes to praise the cold, and those who cried had ice for tears. I'm here again, hello. What muck, no one tending this ground. After 30 years, still sinking down, as if only now inviting a stay. There's nothing here, or tell me, get the fuck away. You said get away. You really told me to get away. Another cemetery poem, Lingering Here. And what of the family soul, mother, as if you already knew his disquieted soul won't find peace in its orbit of earth, an empty satellite fleeing the angels come to lead him through the glare. His girlfriend from King Street, also an angel, on Sundays in taffeta and gauze, flowing the makeshift aisle at the county mall, a model of wedding gowns. He was to be her escort in a tux, a ruffled shirt, and we waited till the store's metal grate rumbled shut. His soul was already flying off to his Italian birth mother, the one he breech busted out of, who gave him away. She couldn't know him, but he'd know her and call her by knocking a bottle of wine to the floor. She'd curse, sweeping him in among the dustpan pieces, and he crying as he again rushed off to answer his friend's last call, entering that room to find it filled with the night's blood, and crying home back to you, your balcony by the sea, straddling the 14th story ledge, leaning out ready to fly, and so on a salty gust into the sunset's infant pink, the last crying beat of the gull's wing, a stretch of mauve, a bruise. In a poem that recollects childhood called The Line. Like the dune fences at the shore, enough slats to keep things together, but still some sand pours through. Remember how each year we'd come back, have to learn the beach all over again, the wind still arranging hills. The shipwreck, one year on the beach, next far out on the sandbar, we traced the fences that were almost covered, a row of red nubbins sticking through the line, never a line, our sticks clacking as we raced. It's called Advice on the Jailhouse Steps, Court Place. If you visit someone in jail, hold onto the handrail. You'll leave part of yourself there. You can't actually give something to the other person, like a pack of lifesavers or a note from your pocket or some dollars. There aren't window bars you can reach through to shake hands. It's plexiglass with a circle of little holes, so what you leave has to pass that barrier. It might be a look that tries to be kind, but is really a lot of questions that can't be answered. It's not a bunch of words because it's noisy and confused, and everybody else's words mix in. It will be something from inside of you, like a lungful of air you've brought from outside. It could be spring and warm and full of color, or winter that is crisp and ice blue. But when you pass this season on, you'll take a season in that's full of very mean things that will fill you up and be inside of you and make you think you should be there too. Won't think your time's up until the guard taps your back because 20 minutes are over that seem like 20 days, and the doors close and you're outside in the air of the season you brought inside, and what's in and out or right and wrong aren't clear. And when you stop at the deli for a coffee and tuna sandwich, you don't know how you passed a bill to the cashier, or how she passed you change, and why she is smiling, or how your hand could lift the cup past the barrier or the sandwich right up to your open mouth. And one of the, I think the keys for me in being able to write this was to be able to understand my anger and to work with the anger, and possibly to allow my brother's anger towards me. This poem is called The Clamp Inside the Body. Okay, brother, give me what you got. A kick to the solar plexus. You want to make it hurt. There's a clamp in there, like a surgeon's mistake, where I clamped it all off. So many mistakes are left in my body. How many in yours? I broke the phone you called on, broke my own arm, took notes, threw bits in the air as if a celebration. Only the clamp is left Kick hard, knock the air out, make it hurt. Send stars into my head, take them back, stuff them into my mouth. And two poems towards the end. One, Last Supper, Broadway, Szechuan. 3 tiers of Polynesian delight, the poo-poo platter, 18 pieces plus 1 for good luck. Did you really order this? Egg rolls and spare ribs with fancy paper tails, clinking goblets, rummed pineapple and passion fruit, toasting without words, a rainbow of mini umbrellas, shrimp in acrylic pink, skewers of chicken dyed red, a bouquet of sparklers lighting our dark corner. And I'll end with, where now do our hands clasp? Between gravel path and granite, each reaching for the other, no longer turn away the warm and cold of it. And grandfather turning his face towards the door, the sun, the chill October breeze, he closed his eyes, I did too, and eyes glowing red, we walked about making fall resolutions. How many he had and I, none back then, and in a soft laugh said, as if I could have known more. I remember that same child swimming in August lake, the sudden updrift, a glacial spring hitting me like a fist in the belly. I kept going, that same man, the frozen sadness returning, ice leaching, eyes unwilling. Between gravel path and granite, brothers breaching, the warm and cold of it, reaching out. Thank you.
Thank you both so much for reading for us and sharing this really powerful work. Perhaps you couldn't see while you were reading the expressions of your audience, but you have had a very deep effect on all of us this evening, I can tell. I welcome anyone to have to ask questions or offer comments. And I have one myself for either or both of you. You know, I just wonder, in this concept of narrative medicine and healing through arts and literature, is there a different experience for your own healing in writing these poems? Was there a particular feeling in the writing, and does something else happen when you read them, either to yourselves or to all of us? Are those two different experiences, or are you just brought right back to the writing and to those moments?
Well, I think we'll both probably have an answer to that. When, I guess there are two answers I have. One, when I do read, and it can be any poem, I try, and the poem, if it's a good poem, I think brings me back to the moment that brought the poem into being, or the impetus to write it. So many of these put me right back into the moment that they came from. I mean, especially I have to say that this set. And are we changed in the writing? Maybe we'll come back to that. Absolutely, absolutely changed.
I think reading for me, I think reading poems aloud and hearing people read their poems is something I love very much, because my poems are meant to be read aloud to other people. They are a communication. I'm writing them. The first drafts of these poems are my emotional outcry, I suppose they were, and some of them were completely confusing. They've changed enormously in the writing. They do hold the emotion, and of course, if you're going to read well, you kind of have to communicate that. So it's not always easy. There's some times that are hard. It's hard to go back into moments that are particularly painful. But I have, these poems are my poems are very shaped, and they work with a lot of juxtaposition. So you'll notice that a lot of them were very short. And that's another way of, I wouldn't say maybe mitigating the pain, or getting in and out of it fairly quickly. So I like to share the poems. Usually when I read, as I said earlier, I usually don't read all these poems about addiction and prison and together. There are a lot of poems in my book that are about other things. So reading it as one full swoop, I said this to Wendy earlier, it was a little bit like, wow, that's a lot. But it is a different experience to do that, which I think speaks to your experience a little bit more, Owen, that these poems that you've written are all about that one subject. And I usually come in and out of that subject and have some other things around it. So that's what I can say about reading them. But I think poems live between people. They're not really meant to be only on the page, and they're not really meant only for the writer. Real poems are meant to be shared.
Right. To me, it's the beginning of a conversation, which is why I like having this opportunity to hear from people.
Virginia, I see you have your hand up. Do you have something you'd like to add?
Yeah, I just want to say, Owen, I'm crying with you.
Thank you, Ginger.
You know, there's another thing about, mourning. I don't know how Owen feels about it, but I don't know that I mourned more or less because I wrote these poems. But I think, and I felt this reading your poems, Owen, that reading poems about the beloved who is dead, whatever happened, whatever anger, whatever losses, it also evokes that person in some ways, in some tenderness that that is also a tribute to that person. So that is something that I always feel when I'm reading these poems about my brother Matthew. I remember him as a child. That's there too.
The as a tribute, I think a poem I didn't read from where the title comes. Actually, one of the impetuses when I met the woman who's now my wife, the second marriage, I wondered how how was I going to explain all this to her, right? And I think that was part of it. My, I was very young when I got married first time, and my first wife sort of knew and lived through a lot of this. But the phrase "best man," as I'm imagining getting married, he's on my shoulder as best man, accompanying me to the chuppah to get married. And I didn't read that poem because I have trouble keeping myself together when I do read it.
Yeah.
An intimacy in both of your poems, just like a exposure of your heart and guts and being. It was so powerful and moving. Thank you.
Thank you.
Edie, can I ask you a question? I'm glad to see you here.
Sure. It's great to be here. It was beautiful.
Edie's friend many years and has done a film on addiction. So this is an area that you've worked with artistically yourself. How is that for you, and how is it hearing these kinds of poems?
Incredibly powerful. I'm weeping. For those who don't know me, I know both Abby and Owen for many years.
You know Abby?
Oh, yeah.
For years. I mean,
gosh.
it's so amazing that you guys have found each other. It's great. And as long as I've known both of you, I knew about your losses, but not the depth or the circumstances even. I know Abby and I taking walks and talking about your brother, but I didn't really know. And I guess maybe having done this movie, I'm thinking about how powerful writing and poetry would be for some of the people that we in our movie that are doing recovery. That would be something really cathartic for them. It was very powerful, both of you.
Thank you.
The movie is a beautiful one. I've seen it, and one of the things it reminds me of, I mean, so much more is known about mental illness, which runs through my family pretty profoundly, and depression, and the connection between that and addiction, which is part of what I got from your movie. I mean, there's just so much more known than 20 years ago.
And that's what I'm thinking when I'm listening to the two of you, is like so upsetting that there's more known and your brothers missed out on that. I mean, even with incarceration, how what a ridiculous thing that is for people in that situation, how that's the wrong way to go.
Mm-hmm.
And they missed out on that, and that made me really weepy for them and for you guys, obviously.
Now, I think we're coming to an end, but I want to say, if you enjoyed hearing Abby tonight, she is reading for all our Berkshire friends. Abby will be reading at Chesterwood on June 26th with another Berkshire poet, Peter Gizzi, who grew up in Pittsfield and actually now teaches at UMass. There's going to be a whole arts program called Arts Alive at Chesterwood 2 or 3 programs a month. Saturdays at 4, kind of mini programs for an hour that let you have your day, let you have your evening, and just if you want to do something. So June 26th, Abby will be reading with Peter Gizzi at Chesterwood. So check the Chesterwood website.
Live.
Live.
Right. COVID safe outside. Really, it will be wonderful.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you, Owen, Wendy, and thank you, friends, for coming. It's lovely to share these poems with Owen and with all of you.
And let me just pre-introduce Dan Becker, who's on the screen. He's a physician, a poet from Charlottesville, Virginia, and will be concluding the series the last Thursday in April.
Well, I would like to thank both of you for sharing yourselves with us this evening. And thank all of you for joining us. And please do join us next Thursday evening for the next session in our series on narrative medicine.
Oh, we should say, I guess, it's on parenting an autistic child. Jennifer Franklin and Becky Faust will be reading their collections. One other quick thing, all the books that you're hearing are in the Stockbridge Library. If you're all the poets have donated their books to the Stockbridge Library, and I think we're assembling quite a wonderful poetry section at the library.
We are, and I will add that several of them are checked out already, perhaps in anticipation of this evening's event. So
Great.
I'm very grateful for those donations and want you to know that they are being read and shared in the community, which is really quite a gift.
Okay.
Okay. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice evening.